I really enjoy working with GMA, although Becky did say I was a graduate of the University of Georgia. Actually, I went to undergrad and graduate to the University of Virginia, which is fine. Actually, I have a bigger debt of gratitude to Georgia because I have 3 kids that graduated from Georgia with the Hope Scholarship. So I probably do owe Georgia more than I owe Virginia. And speaking of kids, I think all those of us who have children, and mine are now in their 20s, you look forward to that day when they are able to pay their own bills. And somehow or another, some of them don't. There is a parallel here. Does anybody else need some copies? There's a parallel here. I'll just hand these to you, Becky, and then you. And that is that I really sort of feel like that the service delivery problem began because cities afforded counties a new authority, sort of like young ones, and now we're sort of paying their bills. I would argue, factually, in many cases, we're paying the county bill when we pay our county taxes, and we shouldn't be paying that bill. They should be standing on their own 2 feet when it comes to certain kinds of services. For the last several years, Linda Lee and I have been representing cities. I commend GMA not because I'm a consultant and I'm looking for business. I'm really not. I'm plenty busy. I commend you because this is a fiduciary duty. I think if your taxpayer sat down with you and said, well, wait a minute, why am I paying somebody else's bills? That's something we shouldn't really be doing. And that's what this is really about. So I want to walk you through that. As I was looking at the survey, though, it said, how do you feel about this and that? I think if the survey said, would you rather do service delivery or get a root canal? Most people are like, oh, that's what they think a service delivery is, like some sort of painful process. It does not have to be that. And I want to walk you through it to show you how GMA is to be commended for bringing this up and why you're to be commended for being here. In your 2 handouts is a 2-page sheet, which really pretty much would guide you through the process that Becky was guiding you through. And then the second page is 2 pages, the front or back of which has the Supplementary Powers Act. And I think maybe other than the attorney who's here, most people would probably not. How many people know about Supplementary Powers Act of the Georgia Constitution? Not many. That's an issue. And then the second one is the insurance premium tax. Most cities in this room are probably levying and collecting that tax, but most cities would not know the duties that counties can levy that, but they have additional duties, which they're not carrying out. And that, too, is an important principle. So I'm going to try to take you through this. It's going to sound like it's complicated, but it really isn't. It goes back to that issue of, are you paying a bill that is not really legitimately your bill? And when I say that, as a city taxpayer. Okay, so here we go. For most of the history of Georgia, and the folks from Savannah are sensitive to that because the community was settled, as you know, in 1733. In 1777, when most of the constitutions were adopted, especially for the first few counties, and the charters were adopted for the counties and the cities, counties did one thing and cities did something else. So the yellow-green triangle is a county, and the little blue triangle is a city. Cities do what you do today. Maybe you do more of it and you do it in different ways, but you're doing water and sewer and police and fire, streets and so forth. And that has continued. At that point in the old days, counties then and still are kind of like extensions of the state. They do the courts and the probate court and the land records, et cetera, et cetera. And that was not a bad arrangement. They might have done some roads, but a lot of those roads were ruled and not very complicated to maintain. Along came the requirement driven by, the population in Georgia in the 1950s was like 3 million people. And as most of you know today, there's like 11 million people. So it is an entirely different state. Whenever they talk about big states, New York and Michigan, well, guess what? Now they're talking about Georgia. We're a big state. A lot of that growth began to occur in the 60s and 70s in all of our communities. And people said, well, wait a minute, we want to get out in the county the same kind of services that the cities are getting inside of the cities. And one solution was annexations. Those can be problematic and hard, and cities have to have the money. So some cities did annex, and a lot of you may be bigger than you used to be. But in other cases, cities were not prepared, or the unincorporated folks were not willing to sit down with the city and say, well, help us get those services. And so they wanted to do the same things that you take for granted, okay? Unfortunately, at that point in time, up until the 1970s, in order for counties to do the city services, they had to go to the General Assembly and say, now we want to do this service in this county, and now we want to do this service in this county. So you all might have heard about population bills. So there would be this annual influx of, well, all counties between this population and this population, they can do this. And all counties between this population and that. So the General Assembly got tired of this constant, give us this authority. And so, and follow your sheet here, as the growth of population occurred, or in some cases, Georgia counties have not grown in population, but there was a big increase in service demands. As subdivisions got built in unincorporated areas, they said, we want water, sewer, streets, and fire. So the solution that people came up with at that point in time was, well, you know what? Let's just give cities and counties equal authority. Sounds reasonable. Let's give them equal authority to do the things that you do every week and every month, in your cities. And so the legislative committee recommended that solution. The legislature adopted a constitutional amendment. The voters approved it. Sometimes you hear Amendment 19. That's because at that point in time, that was Amendment 19. The folks approved it. And so counties in that process were given the authority to do these kinds of services that you did and to do them in the unincorporated. There was a precaution that people recognized needed to be there. A county could not do a city service inside of the city without a contract. And so if you look at your supplementary powers handout that I gave you, it goes through the services that were provided under that act, and then what the prohibition was. What were the services, very quickly? Police, fire, garbage, solid waste, public health facilities, animal control, streets and construction, etc., parks and recreation, stormwater and sewage, water, public housing, public transportation, library, arts, terminals, docks, and parking. Parking garages, for example, codes and code enforcement, building inspections, air quality, pensions, and there was a safeguard, or so they thought, that they said, well, we cannot do that service inside of the city absent a contract, okay? The county just can't unilaterally decide, oh, okay, well, now we're going to do solid waste inside of the city. Can't do that to this day absent a contract with you. So part of the process that you have gone through or will is to say, shall they provide that service inside of the city by contract, and then how much and what are the terms? Okay, that seemed to work. The problem was it didn't prohibit using county-wide taxes to pay for unincorporated services. So here comes these urban services, and they're using the county-wide taxing authority to tax this area to provide an urban-type service in the unincorporated. Is everybody following that? That is the problem. It's not the only problem, but I would say that's the principal problem that we're dealing with. Okay. So then, very quickly thereafter, GMA and others began to say, well, wait a minute now. We're beginning to get a lot of things added to our taxes in our county. That's not really benefiting us. We're getting taxed in the city, and then we're also getting taxed over here. So we're paying a higher tax rate, and we're paying the countywide taxes, and yet we're paying for that. And so calls began to occur, and to this day are occurring, to say, wait a minute, we need to remedy this. And Becky listed what some of the remedies were. Even in 1977, Bill Thornton and others wrote a book. It said double taxation is one of the most severe and perplexing problems facing municipal officials today in Georgia. That was 1977. Okay, so people began to really, wait a minute here. I'm going to age myself, but in 1995, the Georgia Futures Group, I was on that group. so this problem started and didn't. Why? Cities were doing a good thing and allowing counties. Georgia grew. I'm not arguing about the result. Georgia has grown, and now it's a whole different state than it was in almost every community. Issue is taxation. And one thing that is a given, and you know this in this room, people love to get services. They just don't want to pay the bill. And if somebody else pays that bill, that's perfectly fine with them, and they can justify that. That's just human nature. So I'm not being mean about it. I'm just saying if you can get somebody else to help pay your bill, it's just human nature to let them do that. And that, in fact, is what is occurring. So what has come along to help remedy that? Well, the Service Delivery Act itself. Finally the legislature said, well, we got to put a stop to this, and what is it that we need to do to stop it? The other thing, which now is a corollary, the two have sort of been joined together, and that is the Georgia Planning Act, which now requires everybody to, as you know, they have to have a comprehensive plan and land use and jobs and all sorts of. Now it's not a given, but basically the two travel together, and the deadlines for when you renew and change a service delivery strategy pretty much follows along with your schedule on comprehensive plan. Okay, so that the legislature said let's start sorting these out. Who's doing what? Okay. Another one, and I see all the folks in Madison, we did one solution which I think proved very difficult to achieve, was that one of the criteria in the local option sales tax law said what? You should consider the use by any political subdivision of property taxes and other revenues from some taxpayers to subsidize the cost of services provided to other taxpayers of the levying subdivision. Well, what would that be? The use of county taxes to pay for other property taxpayers in that jurisdiction. I think we got pretty good traction on our economic arguments in cities. We had a great deal of difficulty in getting judges to listen to, or counties to listen to this argument here. It was very hard. And in fact, in most cases, if the entire amount of lost had been reallocated to the cities, it wouldn't mitigate the inequities. I'm not saying that in every case, but in a lot of cases. So that remedy has been problematic. Then a third one that I don't think most people except maybe the lawyers are familiar with, and that is the insurance premium tax. If you would look at that sheet, it says in order to levy an insurance premium tax within a county, what must the county do? This applies to every county in Georgia. So this is the one where it's levied on premiums, and I think the idea was, well, if we put a tax on premiums, that will help improve fire and public safety, and then a lower insurance rates. And I think that's basically true. The counties, though, had an additional obligation, which was they must use their funds to pay for unincorporated area police, not the sheriff, fire, solid waste, curbs, sidewalks, and streetlights. It's right in the statute. I'm not making it up. It's right there. Secondly, other services, primarily for the benefit of the unincorporated area, that go beyond those. Next, it could be used to reduce unincorporated property taxes if none of those services exist, and that's a rare thing. Most of them do exist. And then how should they levy it? They have to separate those funds and services in a separate budget, says it in the statute, and they must, when they adopt their budgets, put that amount of insurance premium tax and the services in that budget and put it in the minutes. You know how many counties I've seen that have done that? Zero. Not making this up, it's zero. Now, recently, in the last year, in the cases we've been involved with, you're beginning to see counties like, oh, okay, wait a minute, maybe we better do this. But I'll ask you a question. If you adopted your budgets, you got some clerks here and so forth, if you adopted your budget and you didn't follow the statute to roll back property taxes, publish it in the newspaper, et cetera, where do you think you would be? You think you'd be in a little bit of hot water? I think that you would. Yet in this particular statute, I would say zero. I'm just telling you the places that I've looked, large to small, I don't see that going on. And we've looked at Fulton to, I'm not sure, maybe Lanier. There's some pretty small counties out there that we've taken a look at. So to me, the service delivery statute, to some degree, the comprehensive planning statute, the constitutional amendment for supplementary powers, and this, these may be eye glazers, but these are things that really need to be known about by you and your attorneys and your staff and your financial folks, okay? And I'm not talking, okay, yeah, I live in Savannah. It's probably larger than others, but I would argue that this is the same issue regardless of the size of the county and regardless of the size of the city. You know, I would say, is $100,000 a lot of money to you? Yeah, it's a lot of money in Savannah, and it's a lot of money in Harlan. I can assure you that's important. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And I think Wesley's going to talk about that, regardless of the size of the community. Well, how is the service delivery statute working to address this? I would argue not very well. Let's take our 159 counties. Right now, there are 8 consolidated, and I'm counting Macon, Bibb as the most recent. I worked in Columbus, Muskogee. Eccles County, I believe it is, in South Georgia, doesn't have any cities, so there's probably not an equity issue there, maybe not. One county that we worked with, I worked with as well, is Clayton County, received a 10% increase in their local option sales tax allocation and therefore dropped their demand that the county set up a special service district. That is the predominant tool that you should be aware of. Counties have a very broad power to set up special service districts, which should apply to that unincorporated area, and it's not. And that's what you should begin to think. How do we remedy this? A special unincorporated tax district. Well, how many of those are there in Georgia? And these are subject to a little bit of debate on classification. That is, how many places in Georgia have a bona fide special service district that's sort of like your city, but in the unincorporated area? I count about 8. Chatham has one. Fulton has one. There are several counties that have them, but that's 8 out of 159 counties. There are some places, and this is another approach, there's more than one way to get something accomplished, which would be, and this goes on in Henry County and other places, they say, okay, we don't provide you with police. In some cases, we don't provide fire. So we're going to discount the county millage to you in recognition that you're not getting that service. So it's another approach, because setting up new tax districts is not a popular thing to do, but they can say, well, we'd have charged 10 mils, but we're not doing fire. We're going to charge you 9 or 8, or that's another approach. There are in Georgia about 23 that I counted in 2013 fire districts. Fire districts aren't going to remedy all the problems you're going to see, but it's a start. And there are a whole lot of folks, I think even in this room, where there might be volunteer fire departments and the county's funding those. That's fine, but that money should be in a special service district, or they should discount your county taxes. Okay, so what happens in the rest of the counties? Well, about 114 or so have either the same millage, so you're paying that unincorporated service cost, right? Everybody follow? And actually, there's about 27 or 30 in which the county says, nothing that we do primarily benefits the unincorporated. So we're going to actually charge city folks a higher millage rate. Now, is anybody in that room in that category? I mean, that actually goes on in about 30 counties. They actually say, oh, well, we're going to charge you a higher tax rate inside of the city because nothing we do benefits everybody. So these are the problems. This is what we need to cure. What the services that I find to be, okay, here we go, is Chatham has one, Clayton, Doherty, Fulton, Gwinnett. Gwinnett litigated at length, and the case law is there, the case is there. The judge went through and required Gwinnett County to set up a whole series of special service tax districts. Now, the problem with it is that they had to litigate to get there. So I think that's the issue for you and your lawyers. Is it necessary for you to be combative? I would argue no. You should take a longer term approach. You've got to bring in lawyers, do so. The problem services are sheriff, law enforcement, patrol. My guess is, and I think it's here in Harlem, I think in Grovetown, and take the circle wider, most places are paying for policing in their city, and then they're paying for the sheriff, law enforcement, patrol in their county tax bill. The legislature, being sympathetic to the sheriffs, said, oh, okay, we're just going to keep the sheriff out of this deal. So I find that very often you're really truly being double taxed for that. The counties will argue, well, that's just what the statute says. Elected officials in this room have just as much ability to talk to their county sheriff as anybody in the county. And if I were you, I'd sit down and say, okay, Madam or Mr. Sheriff, what are you going to be doing inside of our city? Because you'll tell us you have the same authority and duties inside of a city. Show us what you're going to do for us inside the city. Secondly, county roads. Many counties in Georgia now, they stop all maintenance inside of the city. All maintenance. They won't do a single thing. Well, how is that? And go to your sheet where it says category 4. It says when a municipality provides a service at a higher level than the base service provided throughout the geographic area of the county, by the county, such service shall not be considered a duplication of service. What does that mean? In order for it to not be a duplication, they got to do the service throughout the county. I don't see that anymore. Maybe in small cities, they'll go, like we dealt with in Morgan, maybe they'll go do a little bit of road maintenance in a smaller, really small community, but most of the communities are now maintaining their own roads. So the county is not providing service throughout the geographic area. I mentioned fire. Parks and Recreation is problematic because, like in Chatham, there's 1 or 2 little county parks inside of the city of Savannah. The rest of the park system is out in the unincorporated area, and Savannah provides probably 10 or 15 times more parks and recreation and cultural services. So Savannah is spending $30 million on parks and rec. City folks are paying the net cost of that, and then the county's spending about $2 million, and I'm paying my share of that. So, how is that fair? But it goes on, and their argument is, well, that's your decision. You want to have better parks and recreation in the community. Everybody, the kids enjoy that. We're not arguing with that. We're not going to stop the service. But how can that be equitable? We're paying half of their cost and 100% our cost. It just goes on and on. Administrative services. Unincorporated services can only be provided with finance and legal and purchasing and insurance, and yet those costs are being charged to the county general fund. That was litigated in Gwinnett. Jail fees, that's a problematic area, but unincorporated folks, they don't pay for the jails. A lot of places, counties are trying to make you pay that per diem when you bring a prisoner. Solid waste and collection, Becky mentioned it. I would argue that, okay, maybe they've got drop-off stations out in the unincorporated. How is that countywide when there's not a drop-off station inside the city? How's that countywide? Planning, zoning, and code enforcement, typically not argued that much about because they don't have legal authority to enforce building codes inside of the city. And the converse, economic development, I see cities and counties equally funding that. And then water and sewer is probably more argued from the county side. They will begin to say, well, if you're charging us 1.5, 1.75, or 2, why do you do that? And I would argue to you, better for you to sit down, do some engineering analysis on your own. In most cases, a higher rate is justified because what's the name of the game in water and sewer and electricity? It's density. If you serve 10 customers in a small area, or if you serve 10 customers in a big area, it's cheaper to do it in the small area. So just do a little bit of homework and don't just write out a check from one fund, from the water and sewer fund into the general fund. Make sure that you've actually done some analysis on that. What's supposed to be going on here? What we need is for city folks to pay their bill for city services. City folks don't mind paying their bill for county services, but you got to stop unincorporated area folks from getting their urban services paid for from the county general fund. That's what this is all about. And so what I'm arguing to you is, as Becky said, first you can take a look at the truly countywide services, the Superior Court, the Juvenile Court, the probate, the cooperative extent. We're not arguing about those. If there's 30 services, most of those are going to be, countywide. But the problem arises when both of you, city and county, say like, oh, okay, well, we'll fund the chamber and you fund the chamber. Well, you're paying the chamber in your city tax, then you're paying for the chamber in your county tax. That is supposed to be jointly funded. And that their funding should come from the unincorporated area. County services primarily for the benefit of the unincorporated, and what the statute clearly says, a service primarily for that area should be funded with taxes from that area. So what you're really trying to do is to identify the services that are jointly funded and the services primarily for the benefit of the unincorporated. It should be funded with insurance premium taxes, assessments and fees, and property taxes from the unincorporated area. That's what it says in the statute. You're not making that up. It's in the statute, and that's what needs to be addressed. Now, an alternate arrangement can be like a millage reduction in your, that's possible. But my question to you is, look at that signature page at the end of the service deliveries agreement. You have signed it, or somebody will expect to sign it, and you're going to say, we find no tax inequities here. Are you really prepared to sign that next go round when that's really not true? Because if it's not true, then I would argue we're not representing our city folks properly. And as I said, they'll often say, oh, well, that's we're doing this and that benefits everybody. I would argue in order for it to benefit everybody, it has to be truly provided countywide, and the city has opted to truly enhance it. Okay, so let's just take an example. Let's just say that the city represents 25% of the tax base or tax digest. Now, if you don't know what that is, basically when property taxes are assessed in Georgia, they do it by area. They give you a digest, and then there's county digest. How much of your digest how much of the county digest is made up of the city's taxable base? Let's just use an example of just to say 25%. Well, what's the problem? You're paying 25% of the urban service cost inside the unincorporated, right? If somebody came to you and they said, okay, I want my 25%, I want my 25%, you'd say, well, wait a minute, why should I be paying their 25%? I'm paying mine, and then I'm paying theirs as well. Your job has got to be to say, how big is our digest? That's the share of the net cost of unincorporated services that you're paying over and over and all across Georgia, whatever the digest shares. In Savannah represents probably 60% of the county tax digest. So any service that's not in that special service district, we're paying 60% of that, as well as our city taxes. So for example, in Savannah, I pay 12 mills in city taxes. Unincorporated folks pay 3 mills. Explain that. Everybody's getting pretty much the same services inside of Chatham. So let's just take an example. Let's just say the city represents 25% of the tax base. Let's just say the county's spending $5 million on roads. Let's just say that the city's spending $2 million. You could make this $500,000 and $200,000. It's easy. Well, what are you paying? Well, you're paying the city taxpayer is paying $2 million for the city roads, and then they're paying 25% of the $5 million. So what are they paying? They're paying $3.25 million out of all of the road expenditures in that county. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. So therefore, they're paying 46% of the cost. You follow? Unfortunately. So I'm going to wrap up here in a second, but counties are happy with this status quo. You know that. It's like, well, what's the problem? What are you guys being so argumentative over? We're just trying to get along here. You guys are just being, adversarial, confrontational. Well, why shouldn't they defend the status quo? And why should you have to suffer the sanctions that DCA will impose? Driveway permits, DOT funding, environmental permits, GFA money, it's going to get cut off because you refuse to sign that which you know isn't fair. Is that right? The second thing that they're going to do, I'm already seeing it, is any of those supplementary power services that they're doing for you, let's just say animal control, they're going to say, guess what? We don't have to do that for you anymore. And if you want to pay for that, you're going to pay a lot more than you've been paying. But we'll give up on that if you ignore these other inequities over here. So they're going to begin to use that as a bargaining tool with you. Thirdly, they will argue this, and I've actually seen this in court filings. They'll say, well, there's no tax inequity there because we're levying a county-wide tax. That's not a city tax. Would they go to a city budget meeting and tell city taxpayers that they're not paying two tax bills? Yes, in effect, that's what they're saying. Okay. Why should you be here? Why should you bother? In addition to tax equity, I'll talk about, I see a lot of sensitivity to economic development. And when you have a higher tax rate, you are less competitive. I've said it on these tapes. Gulfstream is a wonderful company. You can't beat them. What do they do when they get ready to do a major expansion? The first thing they do is ask the city of Savannah to annex that part of their production facility, to de-annex it from the city of Savannah. That's what they do first. Well, why wouldn't they? They want to pay 12 mils or they want to pay 3 mils. So economic development is an important consideration. Secondly, people do vote with their feet. They decide whether they're going to live somewhere or whether the taxes are high or not. Thirdly, and this one I think is hard to quantify, but I think is important, and I can assure you that we've been all over Georgia. The cities that are the nicest places to live pay attention to whether or not they have a vibrant city. Is it a nice community? Does it have nice facilities? Does it have good parks and recreation? I would argue that if you were getting your fair share of the money, I would hope that each of you in this room would say, yeah, if I had another $100,000, this is what we'd do with it. If I had another $200,000, this is what we'd do with it. And you should be getting more money of these taxes to be put into your community to make them better places. I see counties as not particularly good at urban type activities. And, we just spent the last week in the Atlanta area. You look at some of the counties up there. They're not particularly good at urban vitality. They just like, it gets built and then the strip centers they empty out. What happens? Then they sit. And I don't need to tell city folks that's not a good thing. So I would argue that you tend to be better at keeping urban areas vital. And so, I know this is not a pleasurable topic, but I would argue that it is a necessary one. You don't have to go to war. You don't have to hire consultants. You just have, and I think Wesley and others will tell you how you can do this. If somebody has a problem, give me a call. I'm not going to charge you. If I got to get into a long-term relationship, but these seem to be hard, but it's really about your share of the tax base or digest that's really being paid to fund these other services and then incorporate it. And if this statute, and I say this to the lawyers will tell you that there are laws, and then there is some evil that needs to be cured, and then there's a law change to fix that evil. Well, if there are inequities in Georgia, this statute intends to remedy those inequities. Yet you'll get into meetings with the county, oh no, this is not really a problem, you should pay this, because that's what the law says, or this is like, no, this is a fundamental problem with taxation in local government in Georgia. So I think that's about it. And I know that we're probably going to have Q&A at the end. Thank you.